So, Mass Effect 3. It's been a long journey, and this is my final video on the game. Before I get into Colin Moriarty's videos, I want to go over this Day 1 DLC controversy, which isn't really nearly as big as the ending itself, but essentially what happened is that BioWare released Day 1 DLC where you had a Prothean character, sort of like a DLC released the same day as the game, so you'd theoretically have to pay $75 to $65 for the game itself, including tax, and 10 extra bucks for the DLC itself, the first day the game was released. Now, the problem isn't necessarily the fact that it's just greedy, you know, it comes across that way, of course. But the problem I feel, there's basically two big reasons why I feel that's a problem. The first reason, essentially, is that DLC is essentially regarded as an afterthought in this industry. That Day 1 DLC is not necessarily a common thing, if it's at all. I've never seen a game actually release Day 1 content right off the bat and charge people for it. DLC is usually worked on by developers months after the game's already been released. For example, Skyrim. All the DLCs for that game came out, you know, months after the game was released, and within months of each other. That's sort of irrelevant, but essentially, it's regarded after it wasn't in development prior, like while the game was still in development as well. It occurred after they finished with the core game itself, and which is why I regard it as an afterthought. And essentially, the other thing with DLC is that it's never had the sense of being necessary for the story. DLC has always been sort of a side thing. In Skyrim, every DLC is essentially a new quest, but it's a side quest. It's completely irrelevant from the main story arc. In that game, in the Fallout games, for example, or most of them, except for Fallout 3, obviously, where it was prompted by the ending controversy there. But anyway, essentially it's always been an afterthought and basically a side thing from the main story arc. That's what it's regarded as, the DLC, obviously. So it's the incentive there is to be able to replay a game, just to have more content, to, you know, garner players' interests again in the game by after, like, you know, 3, 4, even 6 months after the game's been released, pop it back in again. Oh, here's a side adventure, for example. And I know this seems a little contradictory to my statement before about how irrelevant the Citadel DLC was and all these other DLCs for Mass Effect 3, which is rare, obviously, but I mean, in the game this conflict is so dire that it seems irrelevant and unnecessary to add any real DLCs, to be side DLCs, to be honest with you, considering how the Reaper conflict is just so dire that it just, there's no real point there, in my personal opinion. The thing about a lot of RPGs in general that sort of separates it is that the player can sort of go at his or her own pace throughout the story, and essentially the conflict isn't quite as urgent as some of these other shooters, so that there's availability for side missions or side DLCs. For example, all the Fallout games, like Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and as well as Skyrim and Oblivion, their conflicts are not like so or they don't feel that urgent, or they don't feel that dire to the point where any side sort of stuff feels like it's unnecessary, and that, you know, like the whole world is being destroyed literally by the minute. You know, it's not like their conflicts aren't like that, you know, dire compared to Mass Effect 3's. That is, I'm sorry, that's sort of irrelevant, but essentially that's the point of DLC, is to sort of in general, these post-release DLCs and these other RPGs is essentially to garner players' interests again and to play the game, but not as part of the main story thing, and to play something else. That's the whole point of that. And essentially the whole thing is to not have a feeling of necessity for the overall main quest. That's the point of the DLC, is to be separate from that. And the reason why, obviously, Mass Effect 3, I disagree with that, because it's not, I wouldn't consider it a true RPG, and second of all, the conflict is too dire for side content to be that, you know, available. But that's the point of DLC in general, and I feel like the Day 1 DLC sort of negates that, because it goes right off the bat. It's just atypical and sort of unnecessary to have Day 1 DLC that's released, because it doesn't feel like an afterthought, which goes into my next point, in that clearly the DLC was developed alongside the main game. So essentially, which for two reasons I object to essentially. The first reason is that the loss of quality control, in the sense that the same people who could have been working on this DLC is essentially just they could have been working on the main game. It's like if you're directing a movie, for example. Like let's just say Christopher Nolan. I can't even remember exactly the time dates, so excuse my an error in time. I can't remember, but like for example, if he directed The Dark Knight. If he was directing The Dark Knight and he was literally right in the middle of shooting the movie and or writing the movie, and then he's like, and then simultaneously he's writing or making deals for Inception. It's just not to not have 100% level of commitment or devotion to your project. Obviously it negatively affects the project as a whole, I feel, because if you have the main story, or the main game would benefit from having the full whatever development team. Evidently, it was separate from the main game, but it would have benefited them to sort of is to have that team work on the main game so that the main game was more polished. I mean, clearly no game is perfect, so I don't see like the level of arrogance there in terms of assuming that, oh yeah, it's fine, our game's already good enough, we don't need to go back and sort of polish some stuff, let's just go work right on DLC at the same time. It's just, I don't know, I disagree with that mindset and that mind frame. It's just a loss of quality, and to be honest, that as well as the multiplayer component, evidently having another separate team from the DLC, it sort of goes in, it justifies a lot of the flaws with Mass Effect 3, in that the full development team wasn't exactly working on this, or there weren't as many people working on this as there could have or should have been. The second problem I have with the DLC is that it reinforces a sense of necessity in the game towards the player, and that the amount of squad members in this game is severely low compared to Mass Effect 2. In fact, it's literally axed in half. You have half the amount of squad members available to you, and it feels like it's sort of necessary to compensate for that lacking feature in the game by buying this DLC to sort of even that out a little bit, because it's a lacking feature. The content was taken away, in this case the amount of squad members. So in that sense, it feels necessary for that to get the DLC just to compensate for that. So that's another problem I have with it with the DLC, is that while it in that sense it doesn't feel optional anymore. It feels required to add for the sake of variety to the actual core quest of Mass Effect 3. Just by adding more variety to the amount of squad members you have. That's why it feels necessary for me to download it. When it shouldn't be, like I said before, the point is not for these DLCs to feel necessary. Sort of as a part B to that, evidently some hacker discovered that if he made some modifications, there was content for the DLC that was already on the disc when the game was released. So if he toyed around a little bit, he could actually have Javik as his squad member without actually buying the DLC or whatnot. And to be honest, that actually constitutes as about 85% to 90% of the DLC is actually having the character. The actual mission to get him as a squad member is very short, less than 30 minutes, probably like 15-20 minutes at most. And it doesn't really constitute, that's not what the bulk of the quality of the DLC actually is. It's actually having him actually having him as a squad member. That's the bulk of it. And essentially when the bulk, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if it's just actually having him as a squad member, not having dialogue options with him, but it's still just having him as a squad member constitutes the bulk of the DLC. And when that's all that content is already locked on the disc, it certainly makes the customer feel extremely ripped off with the DLC. Just to recap my problems with it: number one, it defies the traditional nature of post-release DLC when it acts as too necessary for the main plot of the game. Second reason why is that it essentially has partially content on it on the actual disc and not the DLC itself. So that makes it feel like it should have been included on the disc. Third reason why is it's developed at the same time as Mass Effect 3, which comes off as really rushed and greedy, and also lowers the quality of the product when not everyone's working on it. And essentially, they claim that they developed it after Mass Effect. They finished developing Mass Effect Effect 3, but essentially, if that's the case, then they shouldn't have rushed it and released it the same day if it was developed after Mass Effect 3. And if they intended for it to be in there, then they should have released it for free the same day. Obviously, it doesn't. Whatever the reason why they decided to release it on the same day, it comes across as mismanaged, as if they mismanaged their time, or they just rush it out there just to make some extra buck off the consumers. That's essentially it, and those are my problems with it. Now I'm going to I'll read this one quote by some woman who works at Bioware who's defending it. Alright, so I'm going to read this Forbes article here, in defense of the players, obviously, but it quotes this woman named Christina Norman. I'm going to read a part of the article here. It says, former Mass Effect developer Christina Norman, speaking at a panel at GDC, said all the fuss over a Day 1 DLC is nonsense. Quote, building good DLC is really hard, and developers are constantly trying to find a way to develop that DLC better, get it out to players, and to reach players, she told the audience. There's no point in releasing DLC a year after your game comes out, when most people have already sold it back to GameStop 3 times. So that means getting it out early. That means Day 1 DLC. Now, first of all, the problem here is that she's assuming that everyone will resell the game. I don't exactly know what she means here when she says 3 times. So assuming she says, oh, gonna buy it back and then resell it 3 separate times, no one really does that. I'm sorry. I mean, that's not really gonna happen. I don't know any person that does that, and that's a rarity, to be honest with you, 3 times. I mean, maybe she's just exaggerating there, I don't know. But basically, she's just assuming that people are going to trade the game in like after a year after, when in reality, if they make the game good enough, I feel like that sort of degrading the actual quality of, in this case, Mass Effect 3, their game, when they automatically assume that people are going to trade the game in after a year after the release. Maybe that's just playing it safe. But in my view, that's sort of degrading the overall quality of the product and saying, oh, it doesn't have any replay value. Now, given that Mass Effect, the series, has always prided itself on being a choice-related RPG, if those types of games give players strong incentive to replay the games, to get different endings, or to play, because they give you player choice in terms of how you want to approach missions or characters or situations and so forth. And those things really allow the games to be replayed and stuff like that. If Mass Effect 3 obviously had a good ending, or multiple endings, that shape around how the player plays the game as a whole, that would have obviously negated or helped to combat this claim that they're going to have their games be sold to GameStop 3 times or whatever it is she claimed. So that's my sort of problem I have with them there. And she feels like, she says to reach players. I just don't understand. She thinks Day 1 DLC helps to reach players. I don't understand how that's better to reach players than having it be released normally, because, like I said before, that's the point of having DLC in general, is essentially to give players incentive to go back by having side content that you could re-explore in the game. That's the whole point of DLC, is to prevent that. And if you wanted to prevent that, then you release the DLC later. I think that negates her argument there, if you know what I mean. The whole point is that when you release it later, players have an incentive to go back. Now, if you have if by that logic, you're going to have all the DLC there, and your game is going to get traded in a year anyway. It doesn't make any sense to me. So that's my 2 cents about this little thing. Now I'm going to go on to Colin Moriarty's videos. Alright, so now I'm going to go over Colin Moriarty's first video, which is called Mass Effect 3 Opinion Video. It says, many gamers are upset over Mass Effect 3's ending in Day 1 DLC. IGN's Colin Moriarty responds. I'm going to let him, I'm going to play part of the video, then respond to whatever sentence he's saying, and so on and so forth until the end of the video. So let's begin. The following is the opinion of one Colin Moriarty and may or may not reflect the opinion of IGN.
I'm Colin Moriarty, editor of IGN PlayStation. I've been seeing a lot on the internet lately about Mass Effect 3 and about people kind of getting angry and complaining about the endings and the DLC and this and that and the other thing. So people don't like Mass Effect 3's ending. That's it. Some people don't like Mass Effect 3's ending.
That's false. First of all, because they're not just it's not subjective complaints necessarily. It's not just saying, "Oh, I don't like how that Shepard died," or "I don't like how they treated this or this and that or whatever." It's about the main reason why people were complaining is that their choices didn't matter, and all three endings were essentially identical, and there was no closure. But for the other two reasons, it was mainly because of false advertising. BioWare falsely advertised the ending, or specifically Casey Hudson and Mike Gamble basically made exaggerated claims and false promises about what the endings would actually shape out like, and that's one of the main reason why there is this huge controversy in the first place. It's not just about, oh, people just dislike it, it's about false advertising here as well, that people are pissed off about a product, and you know, it's like the thing is, it's like stating, if you get like I don't know, a vacuum, and or I'm just going to use an analogy here, a vacuum, and the people, like the actual developer of the vacuum makes a video or makes a post and says, oh, this feature is going to be in it. You're going to be able to do this. I don't know, like some special feature, and then when the thing is released, he doesn't. The feature's not there, and the person made no effort to actually say, "Oh, sorry, it didn't work out. We didn't actually get a chance to do that." No, he makes nothing. So it's false advertising there, and that's the reason why, or one of the reasons why people were initially pissed off about the ending to the game. Now, let's see what else is here.
So they want a petition to change it. That's the reason that they want BioWare to change it, because they didn't like it. It's not like Drew Karpyshyn and his team or the other writers that stepped into Mass Effect 3. It's not their vision, it's your vision. It's exactly what you wanted, right?
It's not what here's the problem here. I'm not even going to go into the objective reasons why the Mass Effect 3 ending, even including the extended cut, is appalling fiction and inappropriate towards the Mass Effect universe, the story, the themes, the build-up, everything like that. A person who teaches writing courses would shit all over this ending for those reasons alone. But the problem with this whole entitlement argument or artistic integrity argument, by petitioning them to change it, the ballpark, they still it's still in their own ballpark. Essentially, it's not our work. If we demand them to improve something, we didn't do anything. All we're doing is encouraging them to improve their product. They're the ones who are improving it. If they theoretically would write another ending, for example, it would still be their own work. It may be caused by something else, but it's not like we hold up a gun to their head and make them write something. They wouldn't get credit for that, because it's like they write something that's our ideas, but we tell them what to write. We're not telling them what to write. The only thing we're telling them is what we didn't like about the ending, and we requested them to change it. That doesn't mean that it's our work anymore. That would obviously violate copyright issues, but I wouldn't consider that still to be our work when they would theoretically it would still be their work, because they would make the revisions for an ending. So that argument just doesn't hold any water for me.
I hated the ending of Battlestar Galactica. I hated the ending of Rosemary's Baby. You know, that had really bad endings, but you know what? The adventure in getting to that ending was pretty good still. And I don't think it ruins the entire project.
I would agree to some extent here. This is one of the only valid points he actually makes, in that the journey itself to get to that point is excellent. But the problem here is that the ending itself shits all over the journey and sort of renders the journey meaningless or useless. It's like if you have a great road trip or something, it's like if you're making a road trip from like New York to Los Angeles. I'm going to make another wild analogy here. And you have a great time. You bring all your friends. And you have like a really great time. You stop on all these places to get there before you get to your destination. You have a fantastic time. You have a time of your life. And then you break down, like your car breaks down, and you never actually end up getting to Los Angeles. Actually, you get to Los Angeles, but then you get everyone, like, you get mugged, or some of your friends get shot or something. Something terrible happens to you, and it's just like the journey getting there, but your entire objective has been rendered meaningless because the outcome of what happened is just terrible. So while the adventure getting there is great, it ruins the entire experience, because it doesn't really matter. The ending is something. It's the feeling that players get left off with, you know, and it just, I don't know. It's just that argument just doesn't, you know, Sorry, that doesn't fly with me. And in terms of ruining the entire thing, like I said before, it renders it meaningless. It doesn't necessarily, negate the good experience we had, but it would obviously ruin replay value, as well as just sort of like you still have the great memories of the experience or journey in getting to that point, but it would just it ruins the experience because it would render it meaningless. It makes you say like, oh, it's great, but what was the point if it ends like that? You know, that's my point about that his particular argument there.
There's just a proper and improper way to go about criticizing a project and accepting that the fiction that's being made perhaps maybe isn't the way you wanted it to be.
Interesting. Why don't you explain that? Based on my experience, other than lambasting, unless it's personal attacks and saying you guys suck, or personal insults that make a person feel bad about themselves personally and not about the work, I don't see what the improper proper or improper way is. So let's see if he explains it.
There was this one game that came out not too long ago. It's called Resistance 3, and I really hated the ending, even though I was invested in it so much.
First of all, I don't know in this particular case of Resistance 3. I don't know if the game was falsely advertised in terms of its ending. I haven't personally looked into that, but if it's a first-person shooter, most first-person shooters do not offer a sense of choice or progression throughout, and it isn't falsely advertised that you get multiple endings based on whatever you do in the game, and that there will be multiple endings. I do not believe that's the case with Resistance 3, which, to be honest, I don't believe is an RPG. So it's a first-person shooter. Now, I respect the fact that he dislikes the ending, but it doesn't necessarily compare when it wasn't A, falsely advertised, B, objectively broken and incomplete. At least based on my knowledge, I presume it's not. But mainly it's about the false advertising. So, yeah.
So I thought the ending of the game was abysmal. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't go on Twitter and lambast and harass the guys who made Resistance 3.
As far as I'm concerned, I never actually went on the Twitter, but I doubt people actually lambast and harass the actual people on a personal level. If that's the case, then yes, I agree with you there. That's a step too far. You can't actually harass on a personal level in terms of insulting and attacking someone, yes. Do I believe that actually happened? To some extent, perhaps. But the bulk of the complaints, I don't believe were actually harassing people, or specific members of BioWare or EA or whatnot. I don't believe that's, at least not as much as he believes. There may be, I'm sure there's a handful of people. There's some people that probably did that, but not probably. Most people who hated the ending probably did not specifically harass and attack the members of BioWare on a personal level. But yes, I do agree with him on that. That's too far.
So I didn't go on Metacritic and tank their score.
Okay, Metacritic is essentially a rating system on how satisfied people are, and it gives an accurate reflection of user experience with the game. Now, like I said, going back to my analogy, if there's no real payoff towards your great journey and it's sort of all meaningless, or all goes to ruin, then what's the point of having that journey in the first place? Like, if a part of it renders something else meaningless, then I feel like it's sort of, there's no. I feel like that sort of defeats the whole purpose of having. What you're saying is, we shouldn't tank their scores based on our personal experiences with the games. It's like going on GameSpot or IGN and rating it, not as high of a score, not like a 10 out of 10, maybe like a 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10, based on our experiences, because we're extremely unsatisfied with that, not only a part of the game, but how it affects the other parts of the game. And I feel like that is perfectly justifiable for rating a game, even if it is good until that point. Personally, I think it's very understandable, very reasonable for that to happen. And essentially, what other way are you proposing aside from, are you saying, we're not allowed to write a negative review, a wholly negative review based on that aspect on GameSpot or IGN, or rate it low because of such a terrible aspect of the game? I mean, I understand that maybe the game as a whole is good, but I feel like he needs to understand that people have a level of disappointment with the ending where it affects the rest of the game, and it's perfectly justifiable, and it's their right to do that. It's their right to rate the game however they wish, and he just doesn't understand that. I don't believe.
And send around stupid online petitions asking them to change the ending of their own game and their own fiction.
Okay, so petitions. What other method are you proposing? You still have not mentioned a proper way of doing things. Like I said before, the only improper thing is harassing people on a personal level in terms of family members or anything like that. Anything other outside of the personal, the work itself, and you might complain to a person about something, but not complaining about the person. And as long as that's not happening, I don't see the, like I said before, I don't see the proper, another improper way of complaining about it. And to be honest, something like a petition, like just discussing in the forums, you're not going to get attention from it. If you want to draw attention to your cause, you have to do something bold. You have to do something. Otherwise, in this world, you have to take risks. You have to make bold decisions. It's not about just bitching or complaining in a little forum where no one's going to read it. Or you have to get stuff that's noticeable, that can be noticed by BioWare. That's the only way things get changed, is if people notice it. So essentially, you're saying, oh, it's stupid to get noticed, but by doing an online petition. I mean, what is the issue here? BioWare can just choose to ignore it if they wish. What negative impact are you saying about this exactly? And you still have not proposed the proper way of doing so.
That's actually what's happening with Mass Effect 3 right now. People are petitioning BioWare to go back and change the ending of the game, as if you wrote the fiction and they didn't. As if it's your game and not theirs.
Okay, I just covered this point. It would still be their own fiction if they're the ones that are writing it. Like I said before, if you're holding a gun to their head and saying you have to write it this way, and based on my own personal vision, then yes, that would be our fiction, because the people are doing what you want, what you're specifically ordering them to do. You're not creating a new fiction because you're not telling them what type of fiction you want exactly. And second of all, they're the ones who would be writing it on their own accord, and it's their own decision. He's acting as if we're forcing them to do something here. It's more of requesting. BioWare has the power and the right to do whatever they want with the situation, just like we have the right to complain and try and get their attention about an issue that we think is prevalent and important. So, I mean, like I said before, there may be suggestions about what to do, but the bulk of the complaint, it's not about, oh, here's how you should do it. It's mainly about, oh, here's what's wrong with your current ending. Here you go. Why don't you try to improve it? It's not about, there's you get my meaning. There's a difference between criticizing something and then saying, oh, you have to do this and this and this, and that's something different. And second of all, it's on BioWare. It's BioWare's own prerogative to do that. It's on them, and they would be the ones who would write it. So it's really not. It wouldn't be our fiction anyway.
That's not to say you can't disagree. That is to say that there is a proper way to disagree.
Once again, proper and improper. Once again, you mentioned this, but you fail to mention what exactly the proper way is.
At the same time, people are upset about From Ashes DLC because it's day one DLC.
You didn't get the complete game! No, it was day one DLC, and that's unforgettable!
Because God forbid BioWare and Electronic Arts, they want to make money. I know that game development's supposed to be altruistic, and it's supposed to be people just make games for fun, and then they go home and sleep on cots in their mom's basement, because that's the way the game industry has always worked, right?
Of course that's not. I mean, I understand you're being sarcastic there, and of course I understand they're trying to make money. But there's, just to use your improper way, there's a proper way of making money. That's why right now I respect the movie industry a lot more than I do the gaming industry, because they're not trying to milk franchises. They're not trying to just make games as quickly as possible to make as much money as possible. I feel like in the movie industry, for the most part, They rely solely. I feel like in two things in general. For me personally, the most important things in terms of legitimate ways of trying to make money for a product is the actual quality of the product itself, the quality of the product itself, such as whether the movie or something is good or not, and second of all, the advertisement, how they decide to advertise it. Those are the two key things, not cheap ways of trying to screw the consumer over. They're just the proper and improper way. Just for example, the online passes. I mean, I can see some of the intent there, but the real intent behind that is just to gain more money and restrict consumer rights and freedoms there. That would be a corrupt, improper way of trying to earn money because you're ripping people off. You're not actually you're not earning the money. Essentially there. So that's why I think that this Day 1 DLC, I already went over the reasons why I didn't like it, and I feel like I went over it. I don't want to go over it again, but it rips the consumer off there, and they should have released that after, and it comes off as greedy. Like, of course they want to make money, but you shouldn't express the desire for money over the actual quality or the needs or requests of the consumer. You should value, for me personally, I think you should value A, the quality of the project, and B, what the consumers think, or the consumer's level of happiness over your own personal level, your desire to gain more money. Talk about artistic integrity, which is it's defined as valuing the quality of your work and not succumbing to the desire for greed and money. And this is exactly what they're doing with this DLC.
So BioWare makes Day 1 DLC from Ashes, and Electronic Arts says that it's on the disc. But who gives a shit if it's on the disc? Who cares if Mass Effect 3 was 90% DLC that was locked on the disc? That doesn't mean anything. It's their game.
Okay, so essentially you're saying, oh, who gives a shit if it's DLC? That's one of the worst comments he actually makes on this entire video. Essentially, you're saying, "Oh, who cares a shit if it's on downloadable content?" Well, first of all, hard drive space. People don't actually have the availability. Some people of all this hard drive space that would take up at least 10 gigs, 10, 15 gigs if 90% of the game was on DLC from the marketplace. Second of all, it'd render getting the actual disc useless if you actually go out and buy the money to pay. GameStop or Best Buy or whatnot, and go back to your house and try and do that, and it's just from the marketplace. That renders that useless as well. And by the logic of they can do whatever they want, it's their game. There's so many reasons why that's wrong. Oh, it's like for a movie, who gives a shit if it's all if you have to pay for each individual thing? For example, like if you buy a DVD, you're like, oh, you have to go like just use an online pass as an example here. I'm just gonna say, oh wait, if you buy a DVD of like I don't know Batman: The Dark Knight Rises, and you say, oh, you have to once you buy the DVD, oh, you have to pay $10 to see the movie, another $10 to access the bonus feature and all the functions of the disc. Oh, and he's like, oh, who gives a shit? It's their DVD. They could do whatever they want with it. I mean, I feel like that argument there is completely fallacious and just not, a completely anti-consumeristic viewpoint here that's being expressed, and it's just sickening, to be honest with you. It's just disturbing to me.
So if the From Ashes DLC disgruntles you, if the Day 1 DLC disgruntles you, that's fine. Why don't you do something proactive about it by not buying it?
Okay. I understand what he's saying, and technically he is right in saying, the only an effective way, obviously, of sending these guys a message is not buying their stuff. But I feel like that's sort of not very specific on behalf of the developer and publisher standpoint, and saying what actually went wrong with this process. Not buying something or as a result low sales could mean any number of things. Was the actual quality of the DLC any good? How was it advertised? Does it look appealing to players? And maybe they didn't want to buy it because it didn't look appealing, for example. Negative reviews. There could be several other aspects involved or variants there. What matters is players express the exact reason why they disliked it. I feel like that's proactive in terms of letting the developers know why they feel that's a problem, and as a result, the developers might not do Day 1 DLC anymore if it upsets this many people. And I don't see how that's not a proactive method in terms of providing information to the developers and publishers as to why these people are upset and potentially not buying it. I think not buying it at all without any explanation behind it may work in terms of alerting them as to something's wrong, but actually expressing why that's wrong, or why the people are upset about it, will actually lead Bioware to do something different about it, and not just say, oh, and not just for them to come to the realization there. That's my problem with that, is saying he's right for the first part here, and saying, yeah, you don't buy it, then it gets their attention, but then you know, once you have their attention, this proactive way in terms of expressing why you disliked it will actually lead to further results in terms of them actually doing something else about it. That's what I'm arguing.
Of course, this all kind of culminates in a huge problem, which is entitlement. And people think they're getting gouged in the game industry, and people think that, you know, they're spending too much money. Well, I have a freaking reality check for you. The reality check is that games are cheaper both in real money and in inflated money than they've ever been. Even if you spend $10 on From Ashes and added that to the $60 you paid for Mass Effect 3, your games are still cheaper than they were when I was a kid.
Okay, here it says Phantasy Star 4 on the Genesis console was $100 in 1995. I think that reads. All right, so here's the my counter argument. Yes, I understand that they were they were more expensive back then, but they were first of all a different economic time period, and second of all, those games on the consoles were new. So obviously, when it's sort of like a first generational thing, or if it's a new thing, it obviously costs the developers, publishers, whatnot, more money to produce it. Nowadays, like for example, just as an example, like the iPhone, for example, that the first time the iPhone came out back in 2005 or 2006, whenever it was, probably cost like what, $600 or something, or $500? I can't remember. Super expensive because it was the first product there. It was the premier product. And of course, let's just say that's in the 1990s for his argument here. Now the iPhone costs so much less, you know, but it ain't exactly cheap compared for most people. That is because it obviously is costing these people less money to do it because it's not new anymore. That's that's why it's, you know, these things are less, because it costs the people, the developers, less money to produce these games than it did beforehand. Just for technological and hardware reasons or economic reasons or whatnot. That's the reason why. Second of all, I think a lot of games, a lot of franchises are milking their games to the point where they're actually not spending as much money because they're not putting as much effort into the games. They're, like I said before, they're rushing them out, they're milking them just to gain more money. So they're not putting the same amount of effort, they're not putting the same amount of content either. I feel like games nowadays are very short, most games, compared to older games. They're very short, so there's not as much content, not as much effort put into it, and as a result, the price is cheaper. And that's the reason why the prices have dropped down from $100 to $60. Is that there's a reason why? So by your logic, everyone should be saying, "Whoopee ki-yay! Oh yes, this is so cheap and so affordable now." No, that's not what people think. $65 is expensive. You know, people just in general don't have the money to afford that. You know, Colin, I'm sorry. I mean, for your business, not only do you get the opportunity to play these games for free, but you actually get paid to play them and review them. I'm not saying you don't buy your own games for your own personal things or for your own personal collection or whatnot. I mean, that's perfectly fine, but you just have to understand some of the reasons why it's cheaper and that gamers don't exactly feel, you know, relieved that they're, you know, not $100 instead. Because with the drop in price comes a drop of the amount of content in games and the amount of quality in games, and just in the frequency in which they're actually produced. And you know, so just to recap, it took them longer to make the games back then, cost them more money, and nowadays it costs them less money, takes them less time to produce it, and ultimately they end up spending less time on it as well. And the amount of time it takes them is, you know, more frequent and less time. That's the reason why that's happening.
If you agree or disagree, you can always let me know on Twitter. Follow me at NoTaxation. I'm out.
Alright, so that was his video, and to be honest, I mean, he had like one or two valid points that I could understand to some extent, but the way he presented it was came off as smug, arrogant, and ignorant. IGN, you can't spell IGN, ignorant without IGN, of course, but so yeah, just in general, his tone was very arrogant and sort of, you know, dismissive of the fans of Mass Effect and stating that everything they're doing is wrong. And I felt he was condescending in terms of how he stated that there's a proper and an improper way of going about criticizing the project, or in this case, Mass Effect 3. He goes to attack the methods that the fans are going about doing so as improper. Which I argued back in, stating how they could potentially, you know, get BioWare's attention and make a positive impact on what's going on. So I argued back there, but yet he never actually states what he views as a proper way of going about criticizing it, which is just not good in terms of actually, you know, structuring an argument. His tone was bad. I just didn't appreciate his consumeristic viewpoint in terms of, oh, it's their game, they can do whatever they want. That attitude just sort of acts against consumers' rights. His attitudes about the DLC thing, about like, oh, who cares if it's 90% DLC, that doesn't mean anything, it's their game. That just sort of stating, you know, that's just a way to say whatever. That's just a catch-all excuse for anything greedy or anything, you know, that's not consumer friendly that a developer does, stating, oh, that's their game, too bad, when in reality that could negatively impact people, like a corrupt business practice such as online passes or you know, this day one DLC. So yeah, well, that was his first video. I'm gonna get into the second video. Yeah, so hopefully that one, the second video I actually like a little better. So yeah, it isn't. I don't agree with his second video, but at least it's a little. It doesn't come off as quite as arrogant as this one. Alrighty, here is round 2 of me disagreeing with Colin Moriarty. This time it's on his second video. It's labeled New Mass Effect 3 Endings, a Dangerous Precedent. IGN's 2 Collins are discussing today's amazing announcement that BioWare is altering the end of Mass Effect 3. Same format as last time, let's get this thing on the road. Today, BioWare announced it is working on a new Mass Effect ending content for Mass Effect 3 in response to fan reactions.
Hello, my name is Colin Campbell. I look after news here at IGN. I'm here with Colin Moriarty, my colleague. We're going to be talking about Mass Effect 3, the ending to the game, and BioWare's amazing decision to change the ending, or at least to offer alternative endings to consumers. Colin, you've been very vocal about this whole issue since it blew up following the launch of the game. What is your initial reaction to BioWare's decision? I
think it's a terrible decision on BioWare's part. It makes me really concerned for the creation of fiction in our industry. And I think it sets a very dangerous precedent for all developers that are trying to tell stories in our industry.
Okay, well, so he states it's a terrible decision. He hasn't gotten into his reasons yet. For me personally, I think it's a good decision for them to do that for artistic integrity reasons, in terms of realizing that there are serious faults with the ending, and that, you know, they have to take fan feedback into consideration, and they want to improve the project. They want to improve their product. And I respect their decision for that, in terms of the desire to improve their work. Second reason why, from a business standpoint, is losing consumers or losing customers. If BioWare or EA or whichever publisher or company is in charge of making the DLC, or in terms of greenlighting something, they're going to come off as very anti-consumeristic if they don't respond to the fans at all. It's going to come off as, you know, as them not caring about the fans, and as a result, they might lose a lot of their fan base if they make future games, because obviously Mass Effect fans, if they release a new Mass Effect game, for example, or DLC for the game after this event, they would lose customers and they would lose profit. Even maybe Dragon Age games, because, you know, whatever other series like Dragon Age, or I don't know what else what other series they've made, but if Mass Effect fans, you know, carried over and played those games as well, they may stop playing that. So I think it's a good idea to play, or to, you know, appease the consumer, to appeal to the consumer, because the consumers are the people that are buying your product. And, you know, if you cease to appeal to them, if you cease to, or if you don't give off a sense that you actually care about them, then you're going to lose them, and as a result, you're going to lose a good portion of your business, and then you're going to regret doing that later. So that's why I respect the decision. Those two reasons. Let's continue.
You know, we had a meeting this morning, an editorial meeting, and we were looking for somebody who wanted to support BioWare's decision, and we couldn't find a single person.
That's really incredibly disturbing, but not surprising, considering how IGN and GameSpot, I should say, are both owned by companies and basically are bought off by the game developers and whatnot. So they share the same viewpoint essentially as the game developers or publishers. They're just basically pawns. They're an extension of it. I feel, because the game developers obviously pay them to get advertisements on their sites. And things like that. So it's a two-way deal, and as a result, the games receive high praise when they may not deserve it necessarily. And in this case, they're obviously going to back up the people that are giving them the most amount of money. In this case of Mass Effect 3, I'm sure they gave IGN a lot of money. And of course, they're going to back them up over the consumers, which is just a terrible thing, in my opinion.
But we're going to try and talk here about some of the issues that this raises about the power of the public to affect change in artistic endeavours, about how games are so complicated now that they offer alternative endings and seemingly endless alternative endings, and about artistic integrity and where that goes. First of all, let's talk about the public. You believe that this is the work of a vocal minority who haven't actually been all that friendly or helpful to BioWare. Ray Musica in his statement said that this was a reaction to the positive feedback that they got, not the negative feedback.
Wait, hold on a second. Doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose? So if you receive positive feedback about the ending, you're not going to want to change it. If you receive positive feedback, you're not going to want to alter anything. Either this guy got false information about that. The extended cut was a response from all the negative feedback because they wanted to appeal to the players there. I don't understand. So obviously these guys either received false information, or Ray Mazuka, or whatever his name is, lied to us. I mean, he's not being honest there about the true intention behind that.
Yeah, I mean, he did note in his piece, and you can see it on BioWare's website, he wrote just a kind of a few paragraphs discussing how he came to this decision, and he said that they got a lot of negative feedback, and they don't stand behind people assaulting and attacking their developers or the guys that work for them.
Okay, sure.
But they did get some more constructive feedback. But it
some more constructive feedback. I feel like a lot of things are constructive feedback that the fans said that are blatantly obvious, and they're just reiterated a lot.
Definitely was the work of a vocal minority, and I would suggest a super minority, a very small group of people. The game has sold millions of copies, and I would posit that there are several million people out there that have no idea this controversy even exists. Nonetheless, are disappointed with the ending. I know that when
Alright, so he's saying that this is a super small vocal minority. Vocal, I'll give you. The people are definitely vocal in terms of expressing their opinions. Minority, I think not. If you go on Facebook and see that demand retake Mass Effect 3 ending or whatever it's called, as of right now it has almost 70,000 people. I wouldn't consider that a minority, and I wouldn't consider that a small group of people. That's enough to fill over three basketball stadiums or 3 NBA stadiums, and it's enough to probably fill more than a professional football stadium, or around a professional football stadium, if not more so than that. That's definitely not a minority. I know that I don't believe. I presume that most people were not satisfied with Mass Effect 3's ending, and just because they haven't signed the petition to do it or whatnot doesn't mean they liked the ending. So the 67,000 or 70,000 people or whatnot, that's one group of people. That's not everyone. And I feel like, based on everything I've seen in the forums and on YouTube and whatnot, I would say the opposite is true, in that there's a very, very small minority that actually enjoys or likes the ending, and 99% of the people absolutely hated it or didn't really care for it. So what he's saying is blatantly incorrect, I think.
I beat the game before it came out. When I reviewed the game, I actually really enjoyed the ending. It put a smile on my face, and I understood why the ending was the way it was.
Okay, first of all, I guess he obviously didn't know the implications of the ending, and that the mass relays blow up and it was inconsistent. But regardless, everyone's stranded in the systems. That was what the implications were based on the original endings. I mean, I guess he just likes everyone dying. I guess that puts a smile on his face. I guess. Yeah, and stating that I understood the reason why that it was like that. That's so arrogant and ignorant, because how do you know? Did you personally call up Casey Hudson and say, why was the ending like that? You should have rephrased that and say, this is why I thought that, I have my own reasons for thinking why it is. That's what your opinion is in fact, your viewpoint is in fact. It is not a fact. If, for example, I've been reading Shakespeare, I'm like, oh, I know why he wrote that, or why he, did, like, has a particular event the way he did. I don't know that. I never met the artist before. I never met the writer. How in God's name do you know what the reason why they did something like that? You can only assume something based on your conjecture alone, and not based on anything else, because you are not the artist. You didn't know what happened inside the person's mind. You only have what you think you know. So that comment comes off as ignorant and arrogant in stating that his opinion is fact.
And I understand that people might be disappointed with it as well, but that doesn't mean it should change.
Well, okay, I appreciate the fact that I appreciate the fact that you actually recognize this time around that you understand why some people may be disappointed with it. That's a step up from the previous video. But when you say it shouldn't change, here's the argument about why I think it should change. I think if it's based on a Deus Ex Machina ending filled with contrivance, plot holes, inconsistencies, not only that, but abandoning the core themes as well as the core antagonist or build-up, which are both traditional story structure, then I think it should change, because it no longer is credible as a story component, the ending, because it isn't in sync and in keeping with the rest of the game, or hell, the rest of the series. Essentially, it's as if the writers, Casey Hudson and Mac Walters, just wrote it, but they never actually bothered to double check if it made sense within the context. It's as if they wrote it and they thought it made sense, but they as if they didn't play the game or replay this or read the story scripts from the previous from the rest of the game or the previous two games in order to tie it back in. So for those reasons, and as well as the fact that it was falsely advertised in terms of choices mattering, and there's going to be 16 different endings or whatnot, those are all reasons why I think it should change.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a complicated game. It's across a trilogy. It's a huge world with lots of different things going on. It reminds me in many ways of other artistic endeavours at the moment, like, for example, the television show Lost, where it's so complicated. There's so much going on. In this, people are making their own decisions. They have to draw something to a close. But if there are alternative ways to travel through this universe, why can't there be alternative ways to complete it? We live in an age of personalisation. Why can't we have 50 different endings that pleased 50 different types of people?
Yeah, there really is no reason. That's a great question.
Well, without getting too spoilery, because I don't want to ruin the game for people that maybe haven't beaten it yet, I understand that the story arc starts small in Mass Effect, and kind of widens out into like an upside-down pyramid, and then kind of goes back into the pyramid at the end of Mass Effect 3.
Yeah, I agree with you there. My problem is it shouldn't have happened like that in terms of the pyramid. You get to make all these choices in Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2, and you're assuming they would have, drastic differences in terms of the consequences of the choices you make in Mass Effect 3, and unfortunately that wasn't really the case in terms of story structure, when all of them essentially get relegated to war asset points or whatnot. So that shouldn't have happened. Yeah.
So you understand that it opens up, but then it kind of has to conclude in a certain way. But Bioware kind of has to bring conclusion to the trilogy in some way.
Yeah, they have to conclude it based on the choice that they give you. They conclude it, but they don't have to do it in a certain way, as long as it's sort of in keeping. I understand it's a little difficult when you give players real freedom in terms of how they want to approach the game and in terms of how the story plays out based on choices and whatnot. But as long as it's in keeping with genre conventions, character motivations, and the physics that you've established in the universe, there's no real proper way of concluding something when there are multiple different ways. As long as each separate conclusion makes sense, there's really no reason why there has to be one specific ending for multiple choices. I feel like that sort of defeats the purpose of having multiple choices when it just leads to some one outcome. What's the point of that?
You can't leave it so wide open that maybe some players will have a sequel and some players won't.
I'm not... Okay, this is an exaggerated claim, of course, because that would never happen, because I have trust in BioWare's ability that they wouldn't leave something so wide open where there's such a large disparity there. The largest disparity, I would think, is if the two largest disparities would be everyone lives, sort of like in the suicide mission, essentially. Just take that concept and apply it on a larger scale in Mass Effect 3. On the positive end of the spectrum, you have everyone living, Shepard lives, mission accomplished. That's the best possible ending. On the other side, you might have Shepard die, all the crewmates die, everyone gets killed, and the Reapers win or whatnot. Those are the two most drastic disparity on the spectrum of differences there. BioWare is not going to have set up a sequel for some players and not for for others. That won't happen because BioWare has enough level of craft and ability to make certain that it's not that wide open, because that is more wide open than the spectrum they've given us, and they would not allow that to happen. So that argument is not valid to me. And I feel like why shouldn't there be multiple endings based on how you play the game? Like if you play all Renegade Shepard and make all the bad decisions, you should be rewarded with a bad ending compared to if you make all the good choices and played the game a different way. You should be able to be rewarded with something else. So I don't agree with his argument. His exaggerated claim there doesn't really help his argument at all.
Or obviously some players are not going to be happy with the ending. I'm not happy with the ending about a lot of things, and I said that in my last video that I know a lot of you watched. But what I'm concerned about is confusing consumer rights in terms of having a game that works, having a game that functions, that plays properly, that this doesn't not function in your machine or whatever. That's one thing.
So I guess like technical faults are legitimate, but not story-wise. If an ending doesn't function in the rest of the story and isn't in keeping and isn't in tune with the rest of it, does that not constitute as broken? Does that not constitute as needing to be fixed? I suppose in his case it's not, because it's part of a subjective criticism thing. Yeah, and just in terms of my vacuum analogy, if false advertising, if for example like the vacuum thing, if it's supposed to hold a capacity of 3 pounds of dust you could have in there, and really it comes out as 1.5, does the consumer not have the right to complain that it doesn't function properly or as it was promoted to? That's the same thing with the ending.
But kind of taking someone's fiction and trying to alter it or begging them to change the fiction is really something I do take issue with.
We're not begging anything. All we're doing is complaining about it and signing a petition to not begging, requesting to change the ending. There's a difference there.
How do you feel about BioWare? I mean, I've met Ray Muzica, who put out this statement. He is a very serious person. He's somebody who's never going to do anything without a lot of thought. I would rate him as a cautious man. So this is a really, really big deal for BioWare, for EA, for the industry as a whole. Do you think, though, that we lose a little bit of respect for them as artists because they have, caved to public pressure here?
They haven't caved necessarily to anything. You could say it like that, but what I view it as is being respectful to the fans in terms of recognizing that there are faults with it, and acting in a wise business mind frame in that they're going to lose consumers and customers if they treat their customers or their consumers, the gamers in this case, as nothing, as if their opinions don't matter at all, or their requests or concerns don't matter. That's what they're doing, and I don't see how you could lose respect for them about that.
Frankly, I mean, I have lost respect for BioWare over this, because the fact that they even entertained it, I began to kind of lose a little bit of respect for them. The fact that they I understand that they want to, it's fan service and they have consumers and they want to listen to them, and I appreciate that.
Okay, you just sort of contradicted your statement a little bit there. So you say, oh, the fact that they even began to entertain it, and then you say, I understand that they want to, they want to. I mean, I understand he's saying, I understand, but that's what he's saying. He's like, they shouldn't do this. I understand what they're doing, but it comes off as really contradictory there. But
they should have said from the get-go, we support our writers, we support, the fiction that we created, and we're sorry that some of you don't like it, but we can't change it, because what about the people that...
Hold on a second. We support the writers. Well, unfortunately, like you're unaware of, only Casey Hudson and Mac Walters, wrote the ending. So any of the other writers, anyone with integrity or a conscience would not support Casey Hudson and Mac Walters in making that rude decision in terms of them saying, "Oh, we don't need to be peer reviewed." That's a rude decision, and I don't see how anyone with moral integrity can support that when the group is not properly collaborating on the project. And obviously, they're not going to be supporting the writers when the writers are not the ones. The bulk of the writers are not the people that actually wrote the damned ending. So your statement obviously is false. You didn't know anything about that, but really it is false in reality because that's what really happened.
I do like it. What about me? I like the ending. I like the adventure. So now my ending is going to be obsolete, or my ending is going to have to, exist side by side by other explanations or other endings that they might want to bring in to explain things, plot holes that people are upset with.
What is your damned problem? If you were satisfied with the original ending, good for you. But you have I guess you don't like your ending anymore because it has to exist with other endings. You're upset that there's my ending's the best or whatever. That's just the mindset is just it's just not right there. Like if in Fallout New Vegas, for example, they added a new faction to the game, and you go and you make a new faction and it ends completely differently. Now I'm pissed. Somehow I'm pissed off, even though my ending still exists. Then I'm pissed off because they added a new option for players. I don't see the big deal here, or I don't see why you'd be so damn upset when you already have something you liked, and you would essentially the developers are giving the players something that different people might like. That's the whole point of the game is to play differently. So if there's an ending of a different type of player, why are you so damned upset about it?
I just think that BioWare caved, and I think it sets a really dangerous precedent. Could you imagine a developer that doesn't have the clout that BioWare does? They create a game, and people are like, change your ending, change the fiction. And they're like, we don't want to. And they're like, but BioWare did it. BioWare did it, so why don't you? That's the precedent that I'm really afraid about, and that precedent has been set as of today.
How? Okay, well, first of all, I understand what he's saying here. I understand that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, lambaste him, but in reality, that's never happened, and I don't believe that will happen. Very few video games garner a level of devotion and a level of interest like Mass Effect or Fallout, for example. These RPGs that promote a sense of choice to the game in terms of how, the player's level of impact. Then it just doesn't hold any weight really. Any real ending that's been complained about, or any piece of fiction that that has actually been changed as a result of fan feedback or fan criticism, it's usually been regarded as high pieces of work. For example, Sherlock Holmes, everyone loved that, and they complained about killing him off, so they brought him back. That's because everyone loves it. If a game, for example, is not made by BioWare, doesn't have all this stuff, then I find the odds for that actually happening are considerably lower. If the game is not a AAA title, anyone who's like he's saying, if the developer doesn't have the same clout, it depends on what he means by clout. If it means like the resources, or the developing resources. This kind of thing it just doesn't happen unless fans really have a reason to get angry about it and upset about it. Now, what he's saying is not that it's occurring, that they're abusing it. That's what he's saying. And to be honest, the direction might be slightly leaning there just by requesting a new ending in this particular case. But I don't believe that gamers or whatnot are going to start abusing this notion of entitlement when they really have no reason to do that, because games like Mass Effect are the title of this level of excellence and impact on society or gaming society, that would garner enough interest or enough care on the behalf of the consumers or gamers to actually care enough to want to improve the product. That's what I'm saying. I don't think that, and that's a rarity in video games. That's a rarity. Even in something like Assassin's Creed 3 ending, people hated that, but they're not requesting a new one just because I guess the players don't care enough. In this case, they care enough about the game to do that. So his claim really isn't accurate unless these new games are coming out that garner the same level of care and devotion, and then equally a number of that disservice at the end. So that's really not going to happen, in my personal opinion. You could say that later, but in my personal opinion, that is not going to happen.
Thanks very much, Colin. So every cloud has a silver lining. EA and BioWare will be releasing extra DLC for this game, and additionally they'll be releasing alternative versions of the ending, and they'll be charging extra money for that. It's up to you whether or not you want to pay for those. Anyway, this is a big story. If you want to find out more, follow us on IGN.com.
Alright, that was the end of the video. Colin was more polite about it in that case, but most of what he said was I disagreed with, and some of it was factually false. But at least he didn't come off as quite as arrogant in that video compared to the first video, especially his comment in the first video about they could do whatever they want, it's their game. That's like saying if you go to a restaurant and the food's raw, like he's saying, oh, who cares? Like, you know, who cares if it's raw? It's it's the cook's food. They're the ones who cooked it. Who cares? You know, that's just a completely anti-consumeristic attitude. And at least he didn't have it as much, because he started to open up a little bit and say, you know, I can understand why some people may dislike it, at least. Now, as I said before, the bulk, like the previous video, a bulk of what he's saying is incorrect, or I disagree with in this case. He makes slightly more valid points here, but most of them, some of them are just exaggerated and won't happen. And just, yeah, that's all I have to say about Colin Moriarty. So now I'm down to my final minutes of just closing thoughts and my view on Mass Effect 3 and the series as a whole, as I'm viewing and sort of reviewing over these messages from Casey Hudson and Ray Mizuka and Patrick Weeks about the ending of Mass Effect 3. I definitely think that that Dr. Ray Mizuka cares about the work here. I don't really want to read all this stuff, but I mean, they're basically talking about how they appreciate fan feedback, and you know, I'm proud of the team, but we can and must always strive to do better. I mean, I appreciate what he's saying here, and I do appreciate the fact that he at least appears to care about his work. Casey Hudson on the conclusion. I mean, my problem here is that they obviously just sort of refer back to like their like high ratings about critics, you know. Like, we've had some incredibly positive reactions to Mass Effect 3 from the New York Times, declaring it a gripping, coherent triumph. Coherent, which is ironic, considering the ending. Calling it an amazing accomplishment. So basically the most profound words of appreciation, and then, you know, the reaction has been unprecedented. You know, most folks appear to agree that the game as a whole is exceptional. This is from Ray. More than 75 critics giving it a perfect review score, and the review average is in the mid-90s range. Yeah, I mean, that stuff. But then I want to read this this article here, or this thing here about Patrick Weeks. It says, I have nothing to do with the ending beyond having argued successfully a long time ago. We need to say a chance to goodbye to our squad. Arguing with Cortez, I'm going to paraphrase here, about Cortez automatically dying in that shuttle crash, having written Tally's goodbye bit. Here's the important part. No other writer did either except for our lead. This was entirely the work of our lead and Casey himself, sitting in a room and going through draft after draft, and honestly it kind of shows. Every other mission in the game had to be held up to the rest of the writing team, and the writing team then picked it apart and made suggestions and pointed out the parts that made no sense. This mission, Casey and our lead deciding that they didn't need to be peer-reviewed, and again it shows. Yeah, he says the best missions in our game are the ones in which the gameplay and the narrative reinforce each other. He mentions, you know, the Tuchanka mission or the Genophage campaign. He says, I definitely believe that was probably arguably the strongest part of Mass Effect 3 because it, you know, demonstrated the most amount of player impact on the game. The end game clearly doesn't have that. He thought the Luciment conversation was about twice as long as it needed to be, which I agree with. I never actually mentioned that. I felt it was too much rambling there, bogged down the pace as well. He says, for me, Anderson's goodbye is where it ended. The stuff with the catalyst, you have to understand, Casey's really smart and really analytical, and the problem is that when he's not checked, he will assume that other people are like him and will really appreciate an almost completely unemotional, intellectual ending. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. Yeah, it's just, he just says basically when you did that, he says, and then just to be a dick, what was supposed to happen was that suppose you pick Destroy the Reapers. When you did that, the system was supposed to look at your score, and then you'd show a cutscene of Earth that was either very high score, Earth obviously damaged but victory, medium score, Earth takes a bunch of damage from the Crucible activation, and the third low scores, Earth is a cinder block, all life on it is completely wiped out. I have no idea why these cutscenes weren't in there. As far as I was concerned, they were never cut. Maybe they were cut for budget reasons at the last minute, I don't know. But holy crap, yeah, I could see how incredibly disappointing it'd be to hear all the different ending possibilities and have it break down to which color is stuff glowing. Yeah, he says, and to be clear, I didn't really wish Shepard had gotten a ride-off into the sunset ending. I was honestly okay with Shepard sacrificing himself. I just expected it to be from something more, with more obvious differentiation and a stronger tie to the core themes. I definitely agree with him, and just to tie this back, I think that, you know, like I said before, Mass Effect 3 the ending did sort of defy the themes of the series as a whole. And like I said before, I think it was reprehensible what Casey Hudson did, and that's sort of a decision I don't respect. Just sort of in retrospect as a whole, Mass Effect, you know, as a series is probably my favorite. Basically, aside from trilogy, I should say, aside from like Lord of the Rings and the original Star Wars trilogy, and yeah, it's a fantastic experience, even with Mass Effect 3. I definitely disagreed with the direction Mass Effect 3 was going in. I don't necessarily agree with the artistic decisions that Hudson made, particularly regarding Tally's face. I never actually got to mention that. I think that's incredibly disappointing. You know, if they want to reveal it, or something like a reveal of that, which I obviously was expecting and hoping for, it should be a real reveal, like in a real-time cutscene of her actually showing, you know, revealing her actual face, and not on a photograph, and second of all, not having that photograph be photoshopped off the internet of some regular woman and making minor tweaks. I think that lacks artistic integrity, and that you're not actually creating your own work. You're using, you know, an internet image for your work. It lacks creativity and it lacks thought. And I think it lacks care and respect for the character as well. So in that respect, not only do I disagree with that artistic choice, but you know, I resent that. You know, in Casey Hudson, just to go back to that, I mean, he doesn't seem apologetic for the ending at all, and just, yeah, he wasn't apologetic for it, and I don't respect I can't possibly condone just sort of being arrogant and saying, you know, I don't need to be peer-reviewed when at the last second, because that sort of defies the point of artistic integrity, when he had no integrity there. Now, as a whole, I would still recommend Mass Effect, the series, all three of them. They're probably cheap now. You know, first games, in terms of what game is my favorite out of the three, I would say the first game, just because it's the most RPG-like out of all three of them. Yes, it had the most amount of gameplay issues, but I felt the story was strongest there, and you know, it was the most RPG features and stuff. Mass Effect 2, it wasn't quite as much of an RPG, and there were definitely things that, you know, a couple minor things that were slightly disappointing. But overall, both of those games were 10 out of 10. Mass Effect 3, I would say, is a 7.5 out of 10 when looking at it compared to Mass Effect, the previous Mass Effect games. Probably by itself, it's a 8.5, 9 out of 10, but I have to lower it down because they took a lot of stuff out. They made some very poor artistic decisions here. But yeah, is that it? I mean, I can't believe I'm actually sort of out of things to talk about aside from, you know, Tally's face. There was like the whole IGN woman, the whole IGN, whatever her name was, I can't remember, but they had her in there. The woman who works at IGN, I can't remember her name is, but I mean, I think that incorporating someone who's a real figure or person in real life breaks the immersion. You know, it breaks the immersion experience. For me personally, it just makes it less believable for when she doesn't really belong in the fiction. I have no idea why they did that either. But yeah, they're just, I don't know. I mean, personally, right now, I feel like Mass Effect, despite the great journey, it feels like it's the Titanic. I've compared it to that with several of my friends. when I say that, you know, it's a great journey getting to that point, and the ending itself, I'm comparing to the iceberg that took down the Titanic. It's only 20 minutes of the game. It's only about 15 or 20 minutes, which constitutes as, you know, 1% of the time you've actually spent over the course of the 3 games. But it has that level of devastating impact to break apart the sanctity and coherence of the story to the point where everything's a wreck. And right now, I view the series as sort of like in the Titanic movie as sort of the part where the ship is split in half. It hasn't quite sunk yet, but it's just a mass that's broken, and it's just right there. And they've obviously announced that there's going to be new Mass Effect games. They, you know, Hudson and Ray Mazuka referred to that in their, you know, responses to the ending, that, you know, they're going to continue making Mass Effect games. And I've said in my previous videos, I think that's a disservice towards Mass Effect. I think it's unnecessary and superfluous when the journey has already been concluded for Mass Effect. I feel it's unnecessary because there's no, I don't see any real conflict that's necessary. My main problem here is that the fiction, the sequel to Mass Effect 3 would be built off the contrived foundation of Mass Effect 3's ending. And clearly, with the 3 different choices, it would theoretically leave the galaxy in different states with the extended cut if everyone has, you know, different DNA and, you know, different things. So I feel like that it would take a while to account for those different choices. And to be honest, based on the direction that Mass Effect 3 went, that's not really, it's not really going to be apparent, like the disparity. I'm sure they're just going to find a way to sort of streamline that and render whatever choice you made less meaningful than you would hope for, if you know what I mean. They're sort of going to streamline it so they don't have to work as hard to differentiate the outcome of your choices and how it will affect the, you know, the beginning or the foundation of the next game. I mean, I predict that won't happen. So, like I said before about the Titanic, making the new Mass Effect game under Casey Hudson and EA's umbrella, I'm not going to be purchasing that because, you know, the direction of Mass Effect 3 overall was just sort of just not to my liking. I sort of disagree, like I said before, with some of the artistic choices that Hudson made and whatnot. I felt the theme was sort of wrong about, you know, that Archangaic sort of pointed out about, you know, war is hell, whatnot, and you can't save every one of them. You know, it sort of defied the themes of the first 2 Mass Effect games so sort of suddenly, and it was sort of jarring. I felt they missed the theme was sort of wrong. You know, I felt they were trying too hard to be, like, I agree with him. They're trying too hard to make the war feel like hell. It felt sort of condescending and contradictory, bipolar, if you will, when they're trying really hard to make it you feel like war is hell, it's terrible. And at the same time, I felt like sometimes that the Reaper War wasn't even going on. You know, like I felt like there's 2 different things sort of tugging at you, if you know what I mean. 2 different, you know, 2 different levels of focus on that. So that was another problem I had with it. But overall, I enjoyed Mass Effect. I think the first 2 games, despite some of their flaws, are the best games that I've played on the Xbox 360 this generation. And I won't be, you know, supporting any more Mass Effect games. Whatever new Mass Effect game they come out with is just going to be sinking the Titanic until, honestly, they bury it. You know, I've lost my trust in Casey Hudson. I think he's made some very poor decisions, and more importantly, he hasn't really been apologetic towards about them, towards the fans. He hasn't really. He still thinks what he did was right, and that's, to me, is incredibly disturbing. But yeah, would I still recommend getting Mass Effect? Of course. Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2, I think, are some of the best games, you know, on the Xbox 360. I think some of the, you know, I feel like the Mass Effect 3 obviously negated some of the great experiences there. Contrived storytelling. It would have been probably better to have the, at the end of Mass Effect 2 to discover the Crucible at the collector base, so, you know, it would have a little bit more of a build-up, so when they wouldn't just pull it out of their ass. So, I mean, yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I mean, I wouldn't recommend really buying their games new anymore. If we don't buy their games new, their profit margins will change, so they won't have as much profit anymore, and hopefully that'll send them a message. in saying that, you know what, we're disagreeing with the direction that they're choosing. I know that Dragon Age 2 was very poorly received by some of the fans as being, you know, good but not necessarily RPG-like. I haven't played the Dragon Age games. I know they're coming out with Dragon Age 3 sometime soon, I believe. I've started playing the first Dragon Age, and I don't think I'm going to be getting Dragon Age 3, just because I think that they've sort of lost direction. They've lost a sense of what the fans really craved and, you know, liked about their games to begin with. They're losing the, you know, the sanctity of what made their games so great for the consumer. So, but would I recommend Mass Effect? Yep, I would still recommend Mass Effect 3. I think it's a good game. I think it's an enjoyable game to play. They improved the combat and whatnot, but there were just too many, you know, missteps in the game. And I would have, if I had been in charge of the project, if I'd been Casey Hudson, or if I'd been EA, I would have made a few, you know, I would have made drastically different decisions that, in my honest to God opinion, would have overall helped the project. Yeah, that's really all I have to say. I think it's been an interesting journey over the past 5 or 6 years. Great journey, and has BioWare restored my faith in them? Absolutely not. I won't be, like I said before, I won't be buying Mass Effect games, but anymore. Something like this takes time to get over, and I don't think Casey Hudson, based on the direction that Mass Effect 3's ending was going and whatnot, they're just sort of going farther and farther away from what made their games so great, the Mass Effect games so great in the first place. And I don't think they clearly have an idea of what the fans truly want in the game, if they are generally shocked that the players didn't like the ending or whatnot, you know. I just don't think they understand what the players really want, and as a result, I don't trust them. I've lost my trust and faith in them. But overall, it's been an interesting and fantastic journey, and just to leave you off with, you know, one word: shalom. Shalom. Take care, everyone, and I'll be posting more videos about other games, and I'm going to try and reduce my the time limit on my video game reviews to about 10 or 15 minutes, depending on the game. So, take care, guys. Shalom.
Commander.